What's up, y'all? What's up? Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Coach Black. Second episode, we will be talking about the pros and cons of 7-on-7. I feel like there's a lot of good things about it, and there's a few bad things about it. You know what I mean? So I want to welcome y'all. Welcome to chat, man. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe. You know what I mean? Let's get them subs up. First and foremost, man, 7-on-7 is a great outlet for kids. A great environment. You know what I mean? It's good for networking. Don't let nobody tell you that 7-on-7 is a waste of time. I'll be seeing all types of stuff out there, stating that 7-on-7 doesn't do nothing, and it's a waste of time, and this and that. You know what I mean? Just whatever works for you works for you. You know what I mean? Whatever path you want to create for yourself. You know what I mean? And put yourself on a platform. I mean, so be it. You know what I mean? Don't do things on what other people are saying. There's a lot of propaganda out there that try to steer you away from doing certain things that might be helpful to you. You know what I mean? Just starting with the pros, man. For 7-on-7, there's a lot of good things that 7-on-7 provides. You know what I mean? Just for one, it's a good network tool to put yourself out there. On a certain platform, man. There's all type of good athletes out there in 7-on-7, you know what I mean? It's good experiences, you know what I mean? Networking, talking to a lot of people, you know what I mean? Just, connecting those dots that can, put yourself in a different light and, get yourself out there as far as recruiting and, you know what I mean? Just giving people an idea of where you at in your jurisdiction and, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. There's a lot of good things about it, you know what I mean? And I feel like, if you're one of them ones and, you want to get yourself out there on other people's platforms on a national level, you know what I mean? It depends on what type of program you're with, you know what I mean? You can be seen by a lot of people and not necessarily always like, recruiters and stuff being at every 7-on-7 or, all these type of platforms being at every 7-on-7. But there's people that's out there that know these people that have good connections with recruiters and, these other platforms that are, sustainable at doing what they're doing. I feel like, it's good. You know what I mean? You never know who's watching, you know what I mean? And like I said, if you're one of them ones, you out there performing, all this is word of mouth and somebody tells somebody and their friend tells a friend tells a friend. And now you out there, on people's radar, you know what I mean, on their recruiting list. So you never know what can happen. So always, put your best foot forward when you're out there, present yourself in a good manner and have good character and good personality. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, having a certain attitude about you. You know what I mean? People like to see that, being competitive. You know what I mean? But always, keep it to a minimum, of how far you go with that. You know what I mean? So, like I said, 7-on-7 is a good thing. Like I said, if you are able to, get with a good program, that are also teaching the right things, and helping you, build and, making what you do in the fall for football, relate to what you're doing out there. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of times that, guys get out there and, and they just go through the motions, you know what I mean? Create bad habits and, whether it's their mechanics, techniques, you know what I mean? Whether offense or defense, it's just, you want to make it relate to what you're being taught already at your respective schools, respective programs. You know what I mean? You don't want to go out there and just wing it and, and kind of waste your time as far as, what's being taught. You know what I mean? Not everybody teaches the same thing, but football is football. Guys can teach it a different way, but, just be mindful of what's being taught and, not create bad habits because once you start creating bad habits and you start being lazy and having bad technique, that just follows suit into spring camp and summer camp and fall camp with your respective programs. So like I said, you want to get with a good program, a good 7-on-7 program, and kind of build from there. You know what I mean? You don't want to, I see a lot of people out there that, play with different programs and stuff like that, and kudos to them. You know what I mean? And, 7-on-7 is not always about winning. You want to win, yes. You want to win the tournaments, yes. But you also want to get better. The main goal is getting better individually, you know what I mean, to try to perfect your craft, because those respective programs that you with, you know what I mean, if they're just about winning, they don't care what you do. They're trying to do whatever it takes to win. And that's not helping you out when it comes to your high school programs or whatever program that you're with. So be mindful of that, when you're playing with certain programs. If the football language ain't the same, or the goal ain't for you to be able to get better, individually, you know what I mean? So when it comes to a team sport in the fall, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. So, just a couple good topics for you, to keep in mind on how to go about 7-on-7. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that I see out there where, programs, they don't care what they do to win, whether it's cheating, whether it's, having guys play down when they should be up, Like I've seen some guys that play high school football and they might be 14, but you're playing 14U instead of just playing 18U or 15U or stuff like that. You know what I mean? The best thing you can do, if you're playing high school football right now and you're going into these 7-on-7s and you're under 18, play 18U. You know what I mean? Or if your program has an 18U, then that's what you should be playing. You know what I mean? Because that's giving you the best experience on, making it relate to what you're going to see in the fall. Because if you're playing JV or varsity, 15U is okay. But if you're playing varsity football, and you're young, 14, 15 years old, play 18U. That's what you guys should be playing. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind, because that's giving you the best experience, the best, ideal situation on what you're going to see in the fall. So, be mindful of that. You know what I mean? Like, don't let nobody tell you different. You don't want to just come out here and you're playing varsity football and you're just playing 15U, 14U, and you're just dominating. You know what I mean? I got a son that just finished his freshman season of football. You know what I mean? Do I allow him to play 15U? Yeah, just to get some work. But what I'd rather have him play is 18U, like he's been doing. You know what I mean? That's where he's getting the real work. You know what I mean? And that's what we want to see as far as coaches. You know what I mean? You putting yourself in the best situation possible to make it relatable to the fall. You know what I mean? So just be mindful of that. You know what I mean? You don't get nothing out of just going out there just winning. You know what I mean? You want to go out there and get good reps. You know what I mean? Great reps. You know what I mean? And make it, suitable for what you're going to see in the fall. So, like I said before, just, to each his own. But, from a coach's standpoint, that's what you want for your kids that are in these 7-on-7 circuits. You know what I mean? So just keep that in mind. Like I said before, 7-on-7 is a great thing to do. You know what I mean? It puts you out there. You know what I mean? It can put you out there. You know what I mean? You can receive offers from doing that. You know what I mean? It just depends on where you at. Like all these big time companies that are run like Battle and Pylon and, and Passing Downs and all that type of stuff is good work. It's good work that you want, and to put your kid out there. So don't settle yourself short when it comes to these resources that are available in the off season to get yourself out there. You know what I mean? So be mindful of that. And I was just at the Pylon 7-on-7 over the weekend. A lot of good players out there. A lot of good players. You know what I mean? And it was good work all in all. Regardless of who came up short and who won it. You know what I mean? If you're really putting in that work in, I felt like it was a great opportunity. And I love to see kids out there competing and doing what they're doing. You know what I mean? I love it. You know what I mean? And make sure if you're a parent out there and you got your kid out there, you also hold them accountable for, what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, because there's kids out there also that are just doing whatever, and just whether they're having bad habits or they're being a nuisance out there. Like, you don't want your kid doing that out there, because like I said, you never know who's watching, and you want your kid always in the positive light, to be able to network and be branded in a certain way that, with all this money getting thrown around, you want to put yourself in the best light to be able to even receive stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's a crazy day and age we live as far as NIL and sports and, branding and networking. So you always want to put yourself out there the right way. You know what I mean? Don't be that parent that just allow your kids to just do whatever out there. You know what I mean? So again, great weekend. 7-on-7 was great. A lot of good players out there. So just be mindful of that, and let's keep this thing going. And looking forward to see further tournaments being ran right out there. Just putting their best foot forward. You know what I mean? So great opportunity when it comes to 7-on-7. I can't say that enough. So don't let nobody, once again, tell you that 7-on-7 ain't it. You know what I mean? I know there's other sports that kind of coincide with that, AAU, track, all that type of stuff. You know what I mean? If you are allowed to do it and you are allowed to participate, participate in stuff like that. Like I said, find you a good program. You know what I mean? So there's, a handful of good programs out there that I've seen in my years of being out there. You know what I mean? So just find what's suitable for you and, to your skill set, good staff, good programs. So once again, thank you guys for listening, on this episode. And, make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe once again. And we'll see you next time. You know what I mean?